It is always difficult to start, but interesting to open. So I would open this third day of discussion at Association Exchange Forum with a security panel, regional security and conflict resolution strategies, a space for trilateral cooperation. This phrase is questions, so it is not a statement but a question, and we will try to look for possible answers for this question with three excellent speakers. They are Oleksandr LYTVYNENKO, Director of National Institute for Strategic Studies, Paata GAPRINDASHVILI. He is former ambassador, or current diplomat. He worked in the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Victoria ROŠTA. Is my pronunciation correct? Yeah, ROŠTA. She is a foreign, not foreign, but former advisor on defense and security to the Prime Minister, and current an independent expert from Moldova. All three countries, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, belong to Eastern Partnership. But this initiative is very weak with regard to security agenda. Because no conflict resolution, no serious issues were included in all documents of the Eastern Partnership. Meanwhile, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova have occupied territories while Belarus, Azerbaijan, and Armenia don't have such a problem with regard to the Russian aggression. Yeah, with regard to Russian aggression. It is not occasional that our three countries face Russian aggression, but at the same time our three countries signed association agreements. War, occupation, aggression are tools of the Kremlin not to allow post-Soviet countries to deepen our integration with the European Union. So, as our three countries are in the same basket and have similar security problems, maybe we can assist each other, or at least coordinate our efforts to improve our security situation. Mr. LYTVYNENKO, I would ask you to start or to open this discussion panel and express your personal visions and assessments, please.
Thank you so much. It's a great opportunity to speak to this distinguished audience. And I want to say that I am former Deputy Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council too. It means that this panel is a former panel of formers.
And futures.
And maybe. Who knows? But I will, and I would be very glad if we, in some future, in a few years, we will speak about former problems which united us and can say that we successfully resolve it and give to the world the example of brilliant resolution of frozen and non-frozen conflicts, etc., etc., etc. If you agree with this approach, I will start to say more essential things. And I want to start from the first point. The common of this, of our countries is that all conflicts on our territories has the same reasons. It's a Russian policy, and it's results of post-imperial development, results of dissolution of the Soviet Union and Russian Empire. It's a part of this quite prolonged process, first of all. Second, these three countries are victims, but I would not to insist on this word, because I think that the most proper answer for all these problems is development of countries, to make these countries prosperous, stronger, and more effective. One of the reasons of these conflicts, of this problem, that we were not able to proper answer to challenges on the early stage. I am not a deep specialist in the situation in Transnistria or in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, but I am totally sure, I am sure, fully sure that one of the biggest problem of Ukraine, that we didn't be strange and operative enough for mitigate these threats on the first stages of development. I strongly remember of April of 2014 when I was appointed in the authority, and also a position in the authority, and I still remember the chaotic situation in the country and in the institutions. And this chaotic situation, from my point of view, it's environment which allowed Russians and pro-Russian groups to achieve what they achieved. I don't say that they were not aggressions, etc., but we allowed them to behave such they behave. And only one answer for this is strengthening our society to develop resilience of institution and society. The next point, how association agreement can help us in this situation. We have to try to use European experience, best European experience. We have to try to use European norms and European values, and this I mean, first of all, transparency and priority of human rights for reshaping our institutions and giving to people proper answer for questions which they raised. How we can cooperate for mitigation threat? First of all, exchange of experience, exchange of information, exchange of knowledge. Ukraine, in some way, it seems that Ukrainian situation follow to development of the situation, at least in Transnistria and maybe in Abkhazia and maybe in the most dangerous case in Nagorno-Karabakh. And for us, it's extremely valuable to understand your reactions, your approach, your experience for countering these threats and trying to find out solutions. From that point of view, we have a very interesting distinguish between the difference between all examples of these conflicts in Ukrainian situation and quite different. In which way? First of all, we have the first attempt of illegal annexion, direct Russian occupation, and not only occupation but annexion, which they did on the late stages under the Russian flags and under the so-called referendum. And the second one, then we were Ukrainians to stop negative development in Donbass and partly return the situation. And really we were very close to resolving this conflict by military means, but Russian involved, and the situation went to the direction in which we are now. The next point, which is extremely important for us, and we can take this lesson from all our conflicts and from our mistakes. I meant about Ukraine, of course. I'm saying only about Ukraine.
There are mistakes everywhere.
The biggest problem, we were to concentrate on issues of state security, of national security, and partly neglected. It's not the right word, but the issue of human security was on the second stage. People suffering, and it's a huge problem. And partly Russian accused us in this suffering, and partly, very, very partly, of course, they provoked, they were source, but our behaviors not were perfect in this situation. And right now, we try to change our approach and put people, their rights, their interests on the first stage. And from this perspective, we see very partly and not full solution for this conflict, but for example, manageable priority. We try to stop combat engagement. For 5.5 years, we have a very active combat engagements. Even now, we have about 100 shelling per week. It's quite big amount. You see, Russians, and we use mortars, we use even artillery systems by 122 millimeters, all range of rifles and etc. But now priority to try to de-escalate the situation and to try to achieve real disengagement. And the most important steps in this way is military disengagement and creation of demilitarization zone. Without this achievement, we can't even hope for a real ceasefire. This situation is extremely difficult. We have many small but extremely important on the details on the ground. We have a very prolonged engagement line, more than 400 kilometers. We have a huge military troops from both sides, about 30,000-40,000 troops. For example, on the Russian part, occupied territory, we have more than 600 tanks. It's bigger amount than have France, Germany, and Great Britain common. It's a really huge amount of weaponry which belongs to previous epoch, not current. It's amount of the Second World War and post-war period, not modern times. If we are successful in this situation, we can start speak about further steps. If not, all steps about reintegration, speaking about reintegration or some resolving conflict, it's nothing. The first is foremost priority for Ukrainian authority right now, and I think not only authority for society, is achievement disengagement, stopping combat activities and stopping suffering people from this side. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Litvinenko. So for trilateral cooperation, you see this as exchanging of information, experience, knowledges, and so on. And as we are speaking about the EU engagement, we should follow association agreements and to implement internal reforms, to restructure governmental bodies, and to be strengthened inside. Associations agreements are similar for all three countries, and when we look at security and defense part of the agreement, we see that fight against terrorism, organized crimes, illicit trafficking of arms, and so on are fixed there. And crisis management, regional stability, of course. But an association agreement does not provide a recipe how to restore regional security, how to restore regional stability, how to stop external aggression. Because yes, it's very useful to fight illicit trafficking of arms, but what we see on Donbass, what we see in Abkhazia and Tskhin Valley region, when Ukraine doesn't control a part of its border, the same for Georgia.
Moldova.
And Moldova, but from other side, Ukraine is located. So it's enough difficult for Russia to transport arms, weapons through uncontrolled part of the border.
There is Kolbasna with a huge amount of weapons. Munitions, but not only the munitions.
I would propose to discuss Moldovan case a bit later, but now we focus on views from Tbilisi. Mr. GAPRINDASHVILI, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. We are already on our third day of discussion, and of course, let me thank you very much, the Renaissance Foundation, for this wonderful opportunity to be engaged in substantial discussion about the cooperation, and therefore about the future of the Eastern Partnership on one hand, and about the deepening cooperation among or between Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, which we are going to call associated trio from now on, at least. I love that definition. And indeed, our task is to explore and set a clear set of actions for enhanced cooperation within the group of the associated countries on the one hand, but it is also absolutely important to propose measures of cooperation on the security matters of this group with the European Union. Now, we live in times of crisis, of course. Crimea remains occupied, and Ukraine continues to defend itself against the Russian aggression already fifth year now. Russian forces have never left Transnistrian region of Moldova and continue to occupy it. Abkhazia and South Ossetian regions of Georgia are occupied by the Russian illegal forces. An annexation threat is looming in Georgia. So we almost know what are the key security threats and challenges we face, and so does the European Union. Its eastern flank constitutes a ring of fire, and it will remain unstable for quite some time to come, unfortunately. But in addition, the EU has its internal crisis. According to President Macron, it is an economic, social, moral, and political crisis that began 10 years ago. Now, our forum largely relates to the three countries' relations with the EU individually and, most importantly, collectively. And there is no doubt, of course, that experience of other countries, I mean Baltic, Benelux, Visegrad, Nordic, have shown that our interests are better served if we are smart, as LYTVYN yesterday put it, also to enable to have and promote collective sort of joint position. Because in this case, unified voice is stronger and more persuasive compared to single efforts. And of course, in this regard, I once again appreciate the spirit and the spirit as well as recommendations of the joint declaration of civil society platforms that advocate the new level of cooperation in the associated trio. Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia have been trying to increase their individual defense and overall resistance capabilities throughout the years, also through their bilateral cooperation with the EU. Although still much needs to be done, our bilateral security cooperation with the EU should not be underestimated. I will not dwell now about the components of our bilateral relations with the European Union, and that can be, of course, covered during or after our presentations. In addition to bilateral formats, our countries are involved in the Eastern Partnership multilateral cooperation meetings and events on security topics, including in the work of the panel on security and defense policy and civil protection. And Vitalii, you are absolutely right that in real terms, Eastern Partnership has no comprehensive security component and is focused on, rather focused on soft areas of cooperation, of reforms and transformation. And surely the EU and all of us, we know and we understand that without security, of course, transformation and democratization will not be successful in the long term and sustainable. But of course, this argument should not give a pretext to those forces in our countries, be it in Moldova, Ukraine, or Georgia, who resist democratic institution building, and developments of last days in both in Moldova and in my country, in Georgia, demonstrate how unsustainable our democratic achievements can be. But to accept Russia's dominance in the EAP countries will not stabilize and modernize the region or prevent further military conflicts, nor it provide the stability to the European Union. And consequently, the EAP, Eastern Partnership, needs much more engagement from the EU in the conflicts and more a comprehensive security strategy. And there is a reason for that, of course. To put it in simple terms, let me give you a flavor from the recent article in Economist, which argued that Russia, a country being under sanctions from the European Union as well as from the US, a country which economy has been declining, economy the size of Spain, corruption on par with Papua New Guinea, and life expectancy below Libya, has still managed to make a comeback at the world stage and to be reckoned with. And it has its reasons. After the aggression, by the way, in 2008 in Georgia, it has conducted, Russia has conducted massive military transformation, modernization, and invaded Ukraine with well-armed professional fighting force. At the same time, Putin has been politically more astute than the West. As again President Macron put it, I'm quoting, "We showed ourselves to be weak in 2013, 2014, and Ukraine happened." But my point is that things, unfortunately, could go even worse. I suppose that West has not become much stronger since then, and faced with Russian aggression, it is inclined to back down. Yesterday it was EU Ambassador to Ukraine, Masikas, who said that EU might not be good in geopolitics. But well, we got accustomed to the following words, that time is ripe, time has come, but indeed time has come when EU needs to get stronger in that respect as well. Otherwise, Putin will continue to hold his ground and look further for weaknesses to exploit. Recently, the same French president has set the goal to rethink the strategic relationship with Russia, which among other things might include positioning over the conflicts in our countries, as he put it. According to him, strategic dialogue with Russia might also address the issue of guarantees from the side of the EU and NATO of no further advances of a given territory. And here, of course, territories of Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine are meant. Of course, we both individually and most importantly, jointly, collectively, should make our position crystal clear to all our partners that mistakes of the past, if repeated, for instance, not giving membership action plan to Ukraine and Georgia, will be the same mistakes again. And even if the European Union and the NATO would guarantee Russia that they will not further expand, Russia will not become cooperative and stop its conflict multiplication, to say the least. So I would say there should be no calls and trade-offs for the fake neutralities because they don't work. And instead, promises must kept. And that's something what one needs to learn from Mr. Putin. Allies should be supported, promises should be kept, and reforms should be undertaken. Let us make very clear that Russia's primary goal is to bring our countries back into its sphere of influence, and therefore not allowing them to become a part either of the European Union or NATO. Again, yesterday during discussions, it was Daniel Zhilovsky who said that it would be naive to expect any substantial changes and development in the EU position towards the Eastern Partnership, and because there is no appetite for that, and it also, of course, applies to the security dimension. However, we still would need to advocate in our strategic dialogue with the European Union to have the substantial discussion aimed at determining that EAP policy requires a comprehensive security component. After all, it is the European Union which initiated the Eastern Partnership structured consultation since May month, if I'm not mistaken, asking the governments and civil societies in our countries to provide expertise and ideas about the future of our relations. By the way, questions asked relate to the security dimension, as well as how to enhance cooperation between Eastern partners whilst ensuring inclusiveness and differentiation in their relations with the European Union. Therefore, not only there is a responsibility of partner countries in the Eastern Partnership to come up with certain viable ideas, but also there is a responsibility of the European Union to give them the due consideration. But enough now from me to pushing the European Union, and I will try to answer and cover the question, Vitalii, you asked, by having a brief look whether we, meaning the associated countries, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, have been and are somewhat smart in our actions in order not to give arguments to those in the EU who are not enthusiastic to further support us in that direction. So what the associated trio in the first instance would need to do is to commit them to establish an enhanced cooperation in a well-coordinated manner. These three countries also would need to establish a robust institutional framework of cooperation also in the security and defense area. If one goes to web pages of relevant ministries of three countries, you would find very little, if at all, about the real stuff of cooperation in the security dimension. So not only the Eastern Partnership is sinful, but we do have our own significant shortcomings. And time again has come when we should realize that it should not be only either the European Union or the US who would mediate or facilitate relations among our countries and come up with certain ideas for cooperation. Rather, we should become smart enough, willing enough to have the structured cooperation. And as a result of which, then we would be able to propose some viable practical options the European Union to support. And here, let us admit, I mean, first and foremost, Georgia and Moldova, that we would need a idea to say a leading partner among equals, and that's the role I think, I'm confident Ukraine should be undertaking. After decades of hardship, we need to realize that the security threats and challenges coming mainly from Russia will be almost forever with us, that there will be never a world which will not have Putin alike. So best not to regret, but to think what to do to strengthen our resistance and defense and security capacities by our joint efforts. And here I have very few brief recommendations which we could expand, of course, on them, which we can dwell on them and further cover them during Q&A. And first, what comes to my mind is, and again, answering to your question, what to do, and it was, I think, Oleksandr who said that we should share experience among ourselves. That is true, but I would say that's not enough. That's quite basics, but we need to conduct, and that's my first recommendation, to conduct a security dialogue between Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, at least on a quarterly basis. And during the process, we would need to identify common projects of cooperation within the trio, associated trio, as well as between the trio and the European Union, which we should be proposing and advocating. To go in more details, but it's not a detail, of course, it's very important, we can think about establishing or trying to participate in the PESCO, Permanent Structured Cooperation of the PESCO Pact of the European Union. Recently it adopted 13 more projects, and total number now goes up to 47 or about 50. Not all of the projects which have been adopted over the last few years are viable enough to be implemented. However, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia would need to advocate to be sort of a part of this endeavor. Very few words about the so-called soft security, and what comes first to my mind, of course, should come to our mind is the countering hybrid threats. Now, according to the information I have, my sources, my communications, the European Union, I still would use this word, might decide that the Eastern Partnership are willing to include strengthening the resilience of Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova against hybrid threats, including disinformation, fairly soon. However, again, and that's going to be a good deal of development. But when it comes to this particular issue of hybrid warfare, it should become a part of our security dialogue. Our security dialogue, I mean dialogue between Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, in order, or as a result of which the proper policy measures to be put together at an executive and legislative levels in our respective countries, and we would need to coordinate efforts then at our national as well as European levels. Okay, the homework is still there. We need to do much more on this particular subject. And for instance, and that's one of the last recommendations in that respect, we should conduct a hybrid risk survey in real terms and in close coordination with the European Commission, something that has been already envisioned by the joint framework document on countering hybrid threats of the European Union, which dates back 2016. And I would dare to say that not much has been done in that respect up until now. So on this very optimistic note, let me finish my intervention here, and I would be ready to respond to answer to the questions if they're asked.
Thank you, Mr. GAPRINDASHVILI. When you mentioned Mr. Macron, who would like to be a European leader, the only maybe European leader, Mr. Sarkozy came into my mind, and the period of August 2008, when Sarkozy was a president of France, which held presidency in the European Union, and Sarkozy used this shuttle diplomacy, moving between Moscow and Tbilisi, Brussels, Paris, and so on. After that, it was possible to reach some kind of agreements which would not implemented by this time. Nevertheless, the war was stopped, but the conflict wasn't settled. Transnistria conflict, it is not a security challenge just for Moldova, but for Ukraine, for the whole region as well. We know that Russia used this territory for its hybrid aggression against Ukraine in 2014, and maybe today. Ukraine is very interested in resolution of Transnistrian conflict as soon as possible. With this regard, what are the expectations of Moldova from the European Union, from Ukraine, from Georgia? What are visions of Moldova how to settle this conflict? What are visions of Moldova how to develop cooperation in the Eastern Partnership region and between two states? Victoria Roșa, please.
Mr. Martyniuk, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank very much the organizers of this event for inviting me. And as you very well mentioned from the very beginning, now I will speak in my capacity as an independent expert because I came here as a security and defense advisor of Prime Minister Sandu, but over 2 days I'm living as an independent expert from Ukraine. But indeed, the topics that we are discussing today are very relevant for the region and for the 3 countries as such, Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine, because there are security issues that practically bring us together. I think that I will start my presentation by saying that actually here we are talking about the evolutions of the association agreement, but I would emphasize a lot the Eastern Partnership Initiative, because when it was launched in 2009, practically we saw no dialogue between the countries on different areas, and here I mean the countries of the Eastern Partnership. But now what we are seeing as, for example, from the civil society, is that people, organizations are more engaged between each other, and we practically developed this capacity of promoting ideas as common platforms, with a common voice. And this is an experience that we saw with the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum, where organizations of civil society all together advocate for certain issues to be heard by the European Union. And of course, the resolution of the conflicts, human rights, and many other issues are on the agenda, although, as my colleague very well mentioned, unfortunately we don't see the discussions very deep discussion on security infringed in the Eastern Partnership platform, but to be sincere, I see it as a main priority, and we should advocate for this to be included. When it comes to the resolution of the Transnistrian issue, what I can say as a policy or which was and the discussion which was in the previous government was firstly that we have to think about democratizing the region. It has to have the same approach as for the whole Republic of Moldova, justice, anti-corruption, fighting smuggling as being main priorities in order to be able to plead for a political solution when the time will come and the environment will be proper for that. And of course, in order to do this, there was a need for stronger cooperation with the partners, and here I'm talking about Ukraine, because Ukraine is actually the partner of the Republic of Moldova who is helping us to control that segment of the border on which the government of the Republic of Moldova does not have access to. And common checkpoints are one of the issues that comes first in mind. So practically continuing the cooperation, but also having on the agenda fighting smuggling, fighting corruption, and not accepting this to happen in the region, because this is actually affecting all of us, all the region, the Eastern European region. This is one of the first priorities that I see in order to ensure security of our region. But here we have to have joint actions, and also one important thing is that what it is important is that we shouldn't actually bargain this. This is something that should be put first. We should put aside some other issues that are in our bilateral cooperation, maybe on which we don't find common agreement, but to think first about security. So this would be one of the first points. The second, of course, here was brought the issue of Kobasna munition storage, which is a very important issue, which was always on the agenda of the Republic of Moldova in order to be solved. As you know, the government doesn't have access to the region, but also to the munition storage. And in the last half of year, there was already the idea was launched that the Russian Federation would be willing to actually destroy the munition there. One important thing that I would emphasize here is it is okay to have this desire, because from the humanitarian point of view, in case something happens there, it can be a humanitarian catastrophe. So we have to take this issue into consideration. But on a second note, how do we do it? This is the most important thing, because in case we would agree and we'll start the negotiation on the process how to eliminate and to destroy the ammunition there, it should be an inclusive process. It should be with international organizations represented, so that we are sure that we are talking about elimination and destroy of the ammunition and not something else. So practically what I want to mention is, in case this will be moved forward, we have to be very careful on how this process is going to be implemented, and we have to be sure that we have all the partners on board in order to have practically the knowledge of what's going on there, and to be sure that we are talking about the elimination and destroy of the ammunitions which are there and not something else. Also, one important thing that I would like to mention is because here in the description of this panel we are talking about the perception, the threat perception in our countries, and if it is the same or it differs. I think that this is a very important issue, because to my knowledge, because I'm researching this for a long time regarding the threat perception, I haven't seen any methodological deep research which was done or conducted in order to evaluate the threat perception of the population in our countries. So we are talking about, when we are talking about these issues, we are talking very subjectively because it's something that we analyze on ourselves, or we are talking in a very small group. But have we evaluated really the threat perception of our countries and how the population is addressing these issues? I think not. When the conflict in Ukraine started in 2014, if you would talk to Moldovan citizens, you would have seen that the perception was completely different from one region to another, from one person to another, and it is the same in Ukraine. If you will ask people about the Transnistrian conflict before 2014, many of them wouldn't even have an elementary knowledge about that, as people from the Republic of Moldova as well, because sometimes when you talk to people in our country, they will not even know that there is a problem there. So how do we follow the threat perception of our population? Do we discuss enough with our population about security threats? And is security on the agenda of the public officials? These are questions that we have to answer to ourselves, and of course, this should be the basis of the policies that we elaborate. And unfortunately, before understanding that conflicts are really a problem for our countries, we practically did not understand the concept of national security, because each policy that the country is doing should have at the basis the national security aspect. And this is something that unfortunately is missing in our countries, as well as a very clear dialogue between us and our partners is missing. Also, one thing that I would like to raise, and this will be my final point, is the fact that we don't understand the realities in our countries. There is a very small group of experts which is analyzing what's going on in the other country, in the partner country, but in general, I don't think that at a national level we are aware of the problems that our partner countries or neighbor countries are facing. And I would really advocate a lot, and I was advocating for this while I was in my position, to have a strategic but also continuous dialogue on certain issues, and security being one of them. Unfortunately, this at the moment we cannot observe, and but this should be a main priority in order for us to be able to help each other, but also come with a common position to our partners. And this is very much relevant not only for us, members of the Eastern Partnership and neighbors in the Eastern European region, but also it is important to send this message to our partners in the Euro-Atlantic area, because this is also missing. We have to make our partners understand what are our priorities, but at the same time understand what are their priorities toward us. Please tell me if in our countries, but I mainly know about Moldova, does somebody made a research on how, for example, France, Germany, or Great Britain, let's put it this way, perceives Moldova? What are their, where Moldova stands in their priorities in terms of foreign policy? I don't think so. But this is very important if we want to tackle those countries and the population in those countries. If we don't make a very deep methodological research on that, then practically our strategic communication is brought to zero. And here I would like to end my, my presentation, and I would be very happy to answer to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we open question and answers part, I would ask speakers if somebody wants to react on... Please, Mr. LYTVYNENKO.
Thank you so much. I have a very small addition for the presentation. First of all, I'm very thankful for Victoria for their brilliant presentation, but I want if I were very honest, I want to say very few quite brutal but important words. We have to understand the real situation in which we are happening, first of all. I am saying, first of all, about Ukraine, not about your country, but unfortunately the situation is quite close. The GDP of Ukraine per capita is 3.65 times lower than GDP of Russia per capita. It's the first thing which we can say. The second one, for these 5 years, Russia deploys quite strong troops in the south military district, which enough for striking Ukrainian national security forces. Unfortunately, it's the same for Moldova and for Georgia. They deployed at least 3 new divisions, 150, 144, and the 3rd division. They are strengthening Black Sea Fleet dramatically, and now they deployed the new missiles such as Calibra with a range of more than 1,500 kilometers. They continue modernization of their aviation and other strike capabilities. I am very far from thinking that Russia is very strong and monster, etc. But we have to understand, when we have such difference in potentials, when we can't compare our strongest with Russians, our first priority to survive under this situation, and one of the direction of this surviving is engagement, Western help and Western participation. But unfortunately, my colleagues said about the EU approach, which said in few words, the West, and first of all the EU, doesn't want to compete Russia. I don't say in other terms. I say only about competition. And this very difficult point defined our real situation. We have to survive. And it's the most important. Sorry for this.
Okay. Yeah, please.
I'm not going to say something new, but just to repeat perhaps what I've said with some additional emphasis. Things are as they are. There are shortcomings from the side of the European Union, but at the same time, there are significant shortcomings from the side of our own countries. So in order to move forward, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova to better advocate, we need to do our homework first, and that is, for instance, to be more forthcoming in our cooperation, to deepen our cooperation, to institutionalize, if it is necessary, our cooperation. Mr. Kobyliov just come into the room, and I highly appreciate, and I'm looking forward to his intervention on the subject of associated trio, but proudly we need to also say that before parliamentarians and from the EPP side, they have come up with this idea. The ideas also were on our part and in the civil society as well. We were long thinking about how to push forward this kind of cooperation. So we need to push forward cooperation amongst 3 countries. And we are talking about the security dimension. And of course, there are huge room for maneuver, and that would not require that huge amount of resources. And that is, for instance, to launch the security dialogue among the countries of Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova. And that could serve also as kind of an audit, to identify where are the not only shortcomings, but where is the potential for us to cooperate on a number of different projects. And then, of course, as a result of our deepened cooperation, we are able to move forward and better advocate for our deepened cooperation with the European Union and for the European Union to have somewhat more comprehensive security component when it comes to Eastern Partnership.
Thank you.
Yes, just one small thing, because I think that what I have mentioned is practically an addition and a solution to what my colleague from Ukraine has mentioned, because indeed we see that the Western countries do have their position regarding Russia, right? And we are talking about a competition or not. But in order for us to be on the agenda of our partners, we have to understand their priorities. And we have to understand what is driving them to conduct a certain policy, be it internal, domestic one, be it external. So indeed, we are thinking about survival in our countries, because of different reasons, because of political crisis, because of regional crisis. But if we would like to talk about strategic component, right, and if we're talking about longer term policies, then we have to develop this capacity of analyzing what's going on in the other countries and what's going on in our partner countries. Otherwise, practically it will be impossible for us to attract attention, but also to attract support. So unfortunately, although it is very difficult due to the situations in our countries where we put all our efforts in order to survive what the crisis that we are facing, be it domestic, be it foreign, but at the same time we have to think strategic. And here again I will talk about Stratcom. Stratcom is not only domestic but also foreign.
Thank you. Now we open question and answers session, and I would ask everybody who will pose a question to introduce himself or herself and to point to whom you address your question. And if you have a comment, I would ask you to be short, because we started later and now we should finish. Please. I think organizers, I think we have 10 minutes because we started 15 minutes later. Yeah, please.
Yes, my name is Alvydas Medalinskas. I am political. All right, okay. Yes, my name is Alvydas Medalinskas. I am political analyst from Lithuania, who is now working in the last several years with mainly with Donbas region here with the Ukrainian NGO Donbas Gates. One of the main problems, of course, when talking with Donbas, apart of the security, geopolitical issues, is also communication of the people and understanding of the people on the other side of the dividing line. What's Ukraine, what Ukraine wish to do, and so on. There's not enemy country, and so on and so on. My question really, we're talking a lot about various possible cooperation in the security field. So I just wonder, for example, what's the situation in Georgia or in Moldova? Let's say in Georgia, could people who are living in Abkhazia or South Ossetia listen and to see Georgian TVs or listen radio programs? The same also question about Moldova and also Transnistria. Are you involved in various any projects where, let's say, the Georgian people could meet Abkhazian peoples and vice versa, or Georgians and Ossetians and vice versa? And to explain it, that I mean, the Georgia is progressing much better maybe than, let's say, Russia, all this kind of fields, and also democratic life, and so on, and so on and so on. Of course, only part of the issue, but of course, when you're talking about states in Ukraine, and now the current government just thinking about this kind of information campaign. So what about, let's say, your countries? And also, for example, there is a commission by now Anton Korinevich in Ukraine, headed, which is looking for some kind of reintegration issues and so on. Do you have any institutions who would look for, a part of the ministries, of course, which there is in Georgia, who would look for the issue how those occupied by Russia territories or controlled by Russia territories like Transnistria could one day come back to the territories of Georgia and Moldova? Thank you.
Thank you very much. You posed questions which can provoke a separate panel discussion, but I think we will try to answer. Who is ready?
Well, I can start. with the Transnistrian region. Well, indeed, unfortunately, the Transnistrian region is quite isolated if we're talking about media. They do not have access to the right bank, as we call it, like the other part of Moldova, to the informational space which is there. They are mostly under the informational space of the Russian Federation. Nevertheless, via internet, they can have access to different other information. But the question is how many people, because practically what we are seeing a very big demographic decrease of the population. How many people do use internet or know how to use it or even refer to it as a source? Because we are talking about all the generations which are not really engaged in this new social media or other media instruments. So practically from this point of view, they are quite isolated. On the other hand, we must say that compared to other conflict situation in the Eastern European region, Moldova is in a more favorable position because the Transnistrian region does benefit of a lot of assistance from the part of the development partners. There are a lot of projects undergoing there, with the exceptions of projects which refer to good governance, because this is a taboo issue which practically they are not discussing and not allowing projects to be unfolded on the territory, having these aspects and these issues being undertaken. This is considered to be political activity and political influence according to the new NGO law that was promoted in the region. But nevertheless, NGOs in the Transnistrian region do have the possibility to have common projects with NGOs on the right bank. Also, they have the possibility to freely travel. There are no interdictions for them to travel abroad, and they are using the Moldovan citizenship in order to practically practice their fundamental human rights. So practically there are no prohibitions for them to live as any other citizen on the right bank. It is already the restrictions that they have inside the Transnistrian region that they have to follow.
Okay.
Yeah. You are indeed right. It would require to cover this particular topic in another panel discussion, but I will try to be brief. First, I got my personal experience in dealing with Abkhazia mostly issue. I've been personally involved for years now in establishing, and we have managed to establish quite solid contacts with our counterparts, friends and colleagues in Sukhumi. So there is a, surprisingly enough, big, not huge, but big potential for things to go somewhat better. Now, again, to be brief, Russia, again, brings not only disadvantages, but sometimes advantages too. Russia, sort of an annexation threat that is there, has become an ally in our relations. If you do conduct, which is impossible, but hypothetically speaking, if you do conduct a survey, public survey in Abkhazia, I would suppose, some would say that I'm too optimistic or over-optimistic, but I would suppose the majority of Abkhaz population to be in favor Abkhazia not to become a part of the Russian Federation. And the same applies to the so-called political elite in Abkhazia. And that needs to be cultivated. That said, there is an issue of economy. The hardship has deepened in Abkhazia, mainly due to its reliance heavily on Russia, and the budget subsidies from Russia has been declining over the few years. And therefore, sort of a wish from the Abkhaz side to cooperate with the rest of Georgia that is caused because of necessity and not because of luxury, okay? And this is the particular, again, aspect which needs to be supported by all stakeholders, first and foremost, of course, from the government of Georgia. Now, when it comes to the government of Georgia, perhaps that's only a thing, only a field I personally been supportive to government's vision, and that is the strategy which is called Step to a Better Future, and that advocates for the trade facilitation across the dividing lines, that advocates for the education opportunities to be widely sort of applicable to Abkhazia as well. However, what has been persistently missing, that's the to have the real deliverables. However, things have been moving a bit toward the positive direction. And last but not the least, to also answer your question about the disinformation and propaganda, that's how I would put it. What is in Abkhazia, not only Russian-driven disinformation and propaganda efforts have been visible and quite effective in many parts of the world, in the European Union and beyond, also in the United States. So you can imagine what's been happening in Abkhazia. There is a massive disinformation and propaganda done by mostly Sputnik. And when it comes to whether Abkhaz residents are able to listen to the Georgian story, no, they are not, because you don't have TV stations, Georgian TV stations broadcasting, or radio stations broadcasting in Abkhazia. However, there are certain possibilities through the social media. And you would be amazed, because I know what I'm talking about. There is more and more sort of awareness in Abkhazia that there is a need for the real type of interaction with the rest of Georgia. How things might develop, again, as I say, no naiveness whatsoever from my side. Definitely there is a decision in Moscow sooner or later to annex Abkhazia as well as South Ossetia. Where it might happen, nobody knows. Perhaps even Putin does not know yet. And for that exact reason, to be deterred, we need the effective anti-annexation, not only anti-occupation policy, so to speak, but anti-annexation policy, and that's only possible if the efforts are put together, efforts of Georgia as well as its international allies, in order to deter annexation first, and of course then to deepen and to support to the deepening ties between Abkhaz and Georgian communities.
Okay, Mr. LYTVYNENKO.
Thank you so much. I think that the best answer for this question, for this threat, is quick development of our countries. We can make a brilliant system of strategic communication, and in this country there was some very interesting example a few months ago. But if backwardness will be real characteristics of these countries, nothing will happen. Nothing.
Okay, thank you. Next question, please.
Thank you very much. Gennady Maksak, Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism, previously acted as National Facilitator of Eastern Partnership Society Forum. I would like to pose questions to all the speakers. The first goes to Ambassador. We've participated in one panel in Tbilisi a couple of years ago, and we discussed the same issue about security in Eastern Partnership. You mentioned several initiatives which are quite important, PESCO. You mentioned that the number of projects is increasing, but at the same time there is still no decision on the participation of third countries, the modus of their participation, engagement, and so on and so forth. To your knowledge, do you know about initiatives of 3 countries, Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine, to participate in this consultation, in these projects? And another dimension you mentioned about survey of hybrid threats. There is an initiative undertaken by European Union, and out of 6 countries, only 2 participated, Georgia and Moldova. Ukraine is reluctant to fill in this questionnaire because we expose our vulnerability, and we do not want to share the information with the European Union. The question comes whether in this trio, if to conduct this survey, do we have trust between Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine to share this information about our vulnerabilities. Question to a friend of mine, Victoria. Now you're acting as independent expert. With the change of government, is a threat level to the region higher than it was when there was a hybrid coalition, a hybrid government in your country? So basically, have you to fear more about the situation in your country? And the question to Mr. LYTVYNENKO, you know that there was a structured consultations of in partnership done by the European Commission. Has your institute participated in this initiative? And if you have such an experience, what were the recommendations in part of security? Thank you.
Thank you. Hennady is enough concrete in his questions, and I would ask you to be concrete in your answers.
Okay, well, let me try on PESCO. You are absolutely right. The European Commission should have opened it for the third countries already in 2018. It didn't happen. It hasn't happened up until now, but since there is a, what the word to use, kind of a commitment, so there's still there is a room for maneuver, the European Commission to be pushed and the possibility to be open for the third countries' participation. But what could be even more important in practical terms is whether we are ready to participate. And for that very purpose, I said, the shortest answer would be no. But exactly for that purpose, what I propose, not only I, but what is being proposed is these three countries to start a real security dialogue or real dialogue in the security and defense area as well, on a permanent and routine basis. Now, on hybrid survey, what you say about the Ukrainian position, if that is true, it's not correct. It's not the right approach. By not filling surveys, you don't expose yourself to and you show your weaknesses. Weaknesses are there. Okay, in order to cooperate and to get, you know, the benefits of cooperation with the European Union, with individual partner countries in the European Union, you need, of course, to show to show quite openly where you are. That is needed for your own strengths to be built. But I would not agree when it comes to Georgia. Yes, indeed, we participated, but we have not filled that questionnaire either. You would be amazed to learn that the country, I mean my country, Georgia, which has been long a subject of massive Russia's disinformation and propaganda, even well before that particular term, disinformation and propaganda, has become widely used. And Georgia has been a subject of that malign influence already from Russia. Up until now, we even have not held any single debate in the parliament on that particular topic. Just very recently, the thematic inquiry group in the Georgian parliament was launched within the foreign relations, or chaired by the foreign relations committee. But again, here we are. We expected the first report and findings of that work to be published in May month. It has been delayed. Now we expected it to be published just today or tomorrow. But again, because of developments of yesterday in Georgia, all the key figures who were in charge of that particular thematic inquiry on the disinformation and propaganda, they all resigned. Okay, so I'm not aware whether we would be rather soon able to deliver, to have real concrete deliverables on that particular subject. What I mean by concrete deliverables when it comes to disinformation and propaganda. Survey, which you mentioned, it is one of the means you just move forward on that particular issue. But what needs to be done is to have a proper policy measures, practical measures at an executive and at a legislative level. At an executive level, there are examples, not plenty, but good examples. In my mind, to my mind, the Lithuanian example is one of the best, if you ask me, when it comes to the system of countering whole of a government, if you will approach, or whole of a government system of countering disinformation and propaganda. One also could think about the Czech experience, and Czechs have quite a viable system again, countering disinformation and propaganda and fighting against malign influence or foreign adversaries. So one needs to study the European experience, relevant experiences, but at the same time one needs to move forward domestically, also including filling relevant surveys, because that generates a close coordination with the European Union.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Roșa, I would ask you to be short.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Indeed, I know that this is a big concern at the moment because of the fact that President Dodon, but also we suppose that the new government has their own vision on security, defense issues, but also how do they see the foreign policy. At the same time, I have to mention that the previous government, but also civil society, is still in place. Nobody has flew the country. So I think that one of the most important things is that they have to be, the new government, the president has to be aware, and I guess it is aware of the fact that those people will monitor very closely every step that the new authorities will undertake. So I think that this is very important to mention, that we still have in Moldova proper I don't know if I can call now opposition, but also expertise and society which is following every step and also will take a stand when the time will come, when we will see that our country is under threat.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am director of the National Institute for Strategic Studies for 3 months, and for this time we were not involved in this issue, but we are strengthening our foreign policy department, and I hope we will be engaged in this. But I have one very, very small answer for your question which you raised. I said about surviving, not because I think that it's the main approach. I think that we have to change our rhetoric and our approach and say people reality, really situation, first of all, and secondary, the surviving is a development for this country. We have to be active and not give people that this situation is extremely good and will be better. It's not true.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately,
I apologize, just to complement what I said with regard to PESCO. When I said that there is no readiness, I meant a collective readiness, collective of trio readiness. And there could be some readiness, and there is some readiness. I cannot speak on behalf of Moldova and Ukraine, but there is a certain readiness when it comes to Georgia's individual partnership with that particular pact.
okay. Unfortunately, we should stop now because the time is out. I would resume that the minimum we can do together, I mean our 3 countries, to organize current ongoing security dialogue and to have and keep common position on security issues. Let's thank our speakers, let's thank everybody for engagement, and we go to the second panel of today's discussions.